Welcome to Caribbean Bridges. I'm Julian Rogers in Kingston, Jamaica. Today, we're going to give you in the wider Caribbean and beyond a look at the flooding crisis in Guyana, described by their President Irfaan Ali as the worst in that country's history. In fact, to quote him, the CDC advised that the disaster is a level 2 disaster so that we can now move the situation to the international community to get international support. So today, we'll hear directly from the worst hit area, Region 10 in Guyana, and talk to some of the scientists and specialists who are helping us to appreciate what is happening in Guyana and why we should pay close attention to it. Flooding in its fourth week has resulted in notable losses of crops and livestock, as well as infrastructural damage. Reports are that water levels hit as high as 12 feet. And in fact, the Director General of the Civil Defense Commission, the CDC in Guyana, Colonel Kester Craig, says, key for us in Guyana is that we're living in a time when the whole world is affected by climate change, and we must start to take adaptation measures. It's where we start when we talk to the office known as Hydromet in Guyana. They've been keeping a close eye on these developments over the past weeks. We're very happy to have the head of that organization, Dr. Darren Cummins, join us here on Caribbean Bridges. Welcome, Darren.
Thank you very much, and good day to you. It's a pleasure being here.
Tell us, first of all, we'd like to get the forecast for Guyana today, and then give us a track of exactly what's happened in the last month or so.
So today, we've got mainly sunshine in Guyana. This will be short-lived though, because the forecast suggests that tomorrow there will be some increase in rainfall as well, and perhaps in the new week as well. So there is a high chance of rain in the coming days. Let me talk a little bit though about what has been happening in the last couple of weeks, perhaps the last couple of months. So since November 2020 to this point, June 2021, with the exception of February 2021, all of those months we've been experiencing above normal rainfall, which is a long-term average or what we usually would expect for these months. So we've had excessive rainfall practically for the last 6 to 7 months. So this means that the soil is generally saturated around Guyana, so any additional rainfall would have caused significant damage, really. So what we're looking at though for May 2021, with respect to the amount of rainfall we would have recorded, all of our stations across Guyana would have recorded above normal rainfall as much as 150% in some cases. May 2021 actually was the second wettest May in the last 40 years when we look at the country average. So this was a significant May. What is also significant about this particular event is that most of the rainfall would have occurred from May 23rd up until the 3rd of June. So we had a whole lot of rainfall in a very, very short space of time. So it was not distributed over the entire month of May, but specifically the last 10 days of May, the first 2 or 3 days in June, that was the period that most of the rainfall actually was recorded.
And where exactly would that rain have come down? All over?
Right, and I think exactly. I think that is what is unique about this particular period, this particular event, this particular season. In the past, and I think 2005, the 2005 floods that we've had in Guyana, that particular event is etched in the memory of Guyanese as a significant event, but it was generally restricted to the coastal region. This year, though, we've got all of the regions recording excessive amounts of rainfall, and this is not only for May, but for the last 6 to 7 months.
So you've got all this rain falling, and I want you also to explain the geography of Guyana, because my father always talked to me about the fact that you're below sea level, and hence all these inundated areas, etc., not just in Georgetown, but across the country.
All right, so you're correct. The coastal Guyana is above below sea level by about 6 feet. So we are in a drainage system that depends a lot on locks and sluices and the tides for us to release water. So in the past or historically, if we've got significant amounts of rainfall, and there is a high tide, we have to wait until the tides are low before the waters can be released. The drainage system along the coast is typically designed to take off just about 1.5 to 2 inches of rainfall in 24 hours. Obviously, the amount of rainfall that we're talking about here is much more than that. As we move inland, the elevation increases and flow, therefore, is much easier. But we've also got a lot of communities, riverine communities, living in the floodplains of our major rivers. And any excessive amount of rainfall causing the water levels to rise would have impacts on the communities that live along the rivers. What is perhaps a bit different, though, for the coast on this occasion, if we compare to 2005, is that there have been significant investments along the coast to improve the drainage coefficient, which means that we can basically remove much more water now than we would have been able to do in the past with the addition of drainage pumps. And as well, significantly, there has been a significant infrastructural investment as well, known as the Hope Canal, that connects directly to the East Demerara Water Conservancy, that allows for quick relief of water from that infrastructure, and therefore reducing the risk of flooding from that particular facility.
So that really sets the scene then for us to look at the impact of all this flooding. And here's where we turn to look at the worst affected area, which is Region 10. And the chairman of that is Darren Adams, and he joins us here on Caribbean Bridges. And before I welcome Darren, I want to explain something to people. One is Region 10 has 6,450 square miles. That's how big it is. You heard me again, 6,450 square miles. Now, for a little guy from Barbados, let me remind Julian Rogers that that is 40 times the size of Barbados or Antigua that he loves so much, and 3 times the size of Trinidad and Tobago, and 1.5 times the size of Jamaica. So, Darren, with that introduction, let's talk about the impact of the flooding in your area.
Hi, thank you for having me on your program. It's an honor to be here. I want to first of all call on people around the world, in the Caribbean, all over, to pray for Region 10, pray for Guyana on the whole. I think this is the worst flooding that would have affected communities across Region 10, a combination of both heavy rainfalls and rising water has greatly battered the sub-region 2, Kokwani waterfront, Lamp Island area, and in the Demerara River. We have places like Morataro and Malali, and in the Essequibo River, of course, Rivers View, Rockstone, those areas have been affected. Many communities have been inundated close to a month now. As I mentioned, with communities in the Demerara River and the Berbice River receiving the hardest hit. This disaster we are currently experiencing has affected business, it has affected residents, property, agriculture. It has negatively impacted the economic, social, and physical well-being of our people. Just for you to get a background and a feel of what is happening. Persons living in Region 10 in the affected areas have already utilized whatever small savings they were able to accumulate. And so, we are mindful, and I know central government has been briefed of what is happening. We would have taken steps to, one, activate the Region 10 Disaster Preparedness and Relief Committee, which is provided for and is listed as a necessary agency under the statutes of the Civil Defense Commission. And so that Disaster Preparedness and Relief Committee, of course, it demands the inclusion of all the decision makers. And so we have been able, from the level of the Regional Democratic Council, of which I am chairman of the organization, we have managed to bring together all of the key players. The regional chairman is head of the Disaster Relief Committee, and the vice chairman, of course, is the alternate. We have the regional executive officer, who is responsible for bringing to bear all of government's assets to assist affected persons in these communities. We have the regional health officer, the RHO, who is on board to ensure that we we're cognizant that in disasters like this, you can have waterborne diseases, and so we are closely monitoring that. We have the Guyana Police Force to deal with law and order, especially in the context of displaced persons leaving their homes and their possession, moving into shelters. That is, we have the agriculture officer who has been collecting data, especially for those persons, farmers whose livestock would need feed, and to assess the damage that would have done to date. GWI, the Guyana Watering Corporation, is also on board with us to provide, as it relates to the cutting of water to areas where that water would have been contaminated, and to ensure that people do not place themselves at risk. We would have had a situation in Morataro where some children came down with diarrhea. We were quickly able to remedy that with our health team going in. We also have the head of the electricity companies here on board on the committee to ensure that power is cut off to those submerged areas. But of course, they are kept on at shelters and at hospitals there in the sub-region to Kokwani area. The Linden Chamber of Commerce is also on board with us to bring to bear the concerns of the business community in areas that are cut off from supply. And so we have been coordinating the contributions where possible from the private sector, food hampers, and so on. Our welfare and social workers are on board. We have the Civil Defense Commission, who's been calling and checking in regularly with us here at the regional level. It was extremely important, I must say, that this disaster preparedness and relief committee be set up, be activated as early as possible, so that all information and decisions are channeled through the structure. Because we believe, had this not happened, chaos would have resulted. Imagine if you had different persons sending different information. For example, through the organization or the committee, instructions was passed to cut off electricity supply at one location, and then you had somebody else saying, turning on back that electricity. What could have transpired there? And so it was important that this committee be set up. I'm happy that we are receiving assistance from the private sector. Banks DIH, for example, has been donating water and other items, biscuit. We have the private sector coming on board. The RDC would have distributed hampers to the affected communities. And so far, we have been able to monitor everything, stock all of the various shelters. As it is right now, we have 157 persons in 7 shelters across Region 10. And so far, we've been able to provide food supplies and monitor the situation in all the shelters. And we're happy that we haven't had any death or anything to date.
That's an excellent report, Darren. And I'm sure that already people would be ready to respond to your particular needs outside of Guyana. And that, I think, is very, very important. So we now have a better feel for the impact on the worst hit area in Guyana. That's Region 10. Of course, all the other regions been affected. I want to put up a map, though, of Guyana, particularly to give us give our viewers a better understanding of the locale we're talking about. And Darren, I need your help here. Let's start by showing people where Georgetown is, which is the capital, first of all, and then zero in on your area. So yeah. Georgetown. So let's walk through there. I think we can pretty well see it right now where the capital is, Georgetown. Darren, you're on. Yeah.
So the Cream area, if you can zoom in there, you'll see Kokwani right there. In the upper Demerara Berbice area, you should see Kokwani. And that is the area that has been hard hit. If you go up a bit, point the mouse. Kokwani, that's the area that has been hard hit. By
just above Linden there.
Yes.
Right.
No, come down a bit.
Come down.
Right.
Right.
Look
Kokwani.
Where's the upper Demerara Berbice.
Yes, okay.
But right across from there, you should see Kokwani.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
All right. Yes, so we got that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's the area that has been hard hit. There's an area called the waterfront Lamp Island area within the Kokwani. That's where they have been hard hit most. Water has been above 12 feet, covering houses. And that's the area that has been hit hardest by this disaster.
So you really have a big job on your hands here, and I suspect that with the additional rain that's coming down, your job is even far more difficult now.
Yes. Well, one of the things that we have already did is I know government is moving to the parliament for a supplementary of 10 billion, and we have already submitted a list of critical infrastructure works that we are going to be asking for them to immediate approve those works so that they can bring relief. We have also asked for those persons who have been affected in the waterfront area for lands to be made available for them to move to higher ground. And so it is our hope, we're hopeful that government will respond to the needs and to the requests that we would have made. The Region 10 disaster preparedness, I must say, yesterday we convened a meeting and we were able to present to them some of the challenges that we are faced with. We are going to be compiling a report to submit. We were mandated to do so. But I want to ask at this time publicly that central government move immediately to set up a bipartisan board that will deal with this disaster, to have all of the various stakeholders involved so that together we can put our minds together and get the best possible results in the end.
Darren, thank you very much. I will come back to you because I got a couple of questions which will be raised, no doubt. But let me go to Barbados now and welcome Cedric J. Van Midbeck, who is a climatologist. He's at the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology. We had a conversation a few years ago, I think it is, Cedric. But I'm happy to have you on board right now to talk about this in the wider Caribbean or world context for that matter, because we're really talking here about climate change and its impact, not just the regular rain situation in Guyana, but certainly these unusual circumstances now. Cedric, welcome.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you also for inviting me to be part of this important conversation. It's really timely. Well, actually, I guess you could say it's a bit late to get that conversation going, but it's not the first time we talk about this. So when you look at things like flooding, when you look at things like droughts, when you look at things like heat and sea level rise and all those kind of expressions of climate change in the Caribbean, those are things that we can actually measure. And as a scientist, when you measure things, you can start looking at, is there any way in which I can predict that? Is there anything in the climate that allows me to tell something about the risk of flooding and how that changes? Of course, flooding depends on lots of other things than just rainfall, and I'm sure that Dr. Cummins can elaborate his wealth of knowledge to that point. But if you think about extreme rainfall, which is typically what triggers flooding, you can see that around the world there are places where the frequency of extreme rainfall has actually increased. That is not yet the case in the Caribbean, though, I must say. So what we find in the Caribbean is that even though it's getting hotter and even though our sea levels are rising, which, mind you, in Guyana can also ultimately contribute to flooding, because as Dr. Cummings said, if you can't evacuate the water during low tide because low tide is getting higher, then you're left with more water on land. So although those things are really changing fast in the Caribbean, the frequency of extreme rainfall is not really changing over longer terms. So I'm talking about decades here. What we are seeing this year, though, which probably has contributed a lot towards producing so much excessive rainfall is an event that is taking place every 2 to 7 years in the Pacific Ocean, so quite far away. And that event is known as La Nina. Some of you might have heard in the past about an event called El Nino, which is the counterpart. Well, El Nino and La Nina are basically when the sea surface temperatures of the ocean in the eastern Pacific Ocean, so west of the west coast of South America, are cooler than usual, that's a La Nina, or warmer than usual, that's an El Nino. When there's a La Nina, there are a couple of things that will cause the global climate to respond to what is happening in the Pacific. The first thing that happens is that you're going to get in the summer, during the onset of a La Nina, you're going to get colder upper level atmosphere temperatures. So that means at a height of about 10 to 15 kilometers of elevation, the temperatures are going to be a bit cooler than usual. Now, if that is the case, that actually, meteorologically speaking, can favor stronger rainfall. So that's in the summertime. Now comes the autumn and the winter, and another player is going to come in, and that is when the winds at a high level are decreasing in speed compared to what they usually are. When you have slack winds, sluggish winds up top, and you have easterly winds at the bottom, basically what you allow for is for very deep thunderstorms and showers to develop, because if there's a lot of wind in a different direction up top, that's going to shear away the top of the clouds, leaving you with more shallow clouds. So in this case, La Nina would have made it easier on regular occasion over Guyana to have deeper storm clouds producing more rainfall. And so that is probably, from the climate side, it's not so much climate change, but it's what we call climate variability at this stage that has caused these tremendous amounts of rainfall. Just to give you a statistic here, in any La Nina event that occurs, you have about 70% chance that Guyana ends up wetter than usual. And so this is what happened this year. But of course, that's only one component of rainfall. It tells you how likely such extreme rainfall is over Guyana in general. But on top of that, you of course have weather systems that have to produce the rainfall on a specific day. And as Dr. Cummings has said, it was quite remarkable that in late May and beginning of June, you had tremendous amounts of rainfall in what for Guyana is the main wet season.
This is Caribbean Bridges. I'm Julian Rogers in Kingston, Jamaica. We're reaching across the region, and today we're focusing on the flooding crisis in Guyana. And that's where we'll head back to Georgetown to the head of Hydromet there. He's Dr. Darren Cummins. Darren, could you spend a little time explaining the difference between Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean? I'll tell you why. Because some people have made the mistake of calling Guyana an island, first of all. But then because of the closeness, I suspect, between the Guyanese and the rest of the Caribbean, we do feel like you're island people. But anyhow, that's a geographical thing. But I think it's important here to make the distinction between what is a continental portion of the world versus our Caribbean, and why there's this difference then in the climatic conditions.
Thank you again for the question. Yes, Guyana, we see ourselves perhaps as we call ourselves mainland Caribbean. We're by no means an island, but we do have islands that are as big as some of those in the Caribbean. So Guyana, I mean, from in terms of the differences, I think Guyana for sure is like I said, a mainland country, a continental country. We are, for the most part, most of the population lives along the coastal band where most of the agricultural activity takes place. Tourism, ecotourism is what brings that, I suppose, that similarity with the rest of the Caribbean, because we have a very large hinterland. 90% of the country or so is hinterland, and we have about 80 to 85% of the country is still covered in pristine forest, largely uninhabited, but there are in fact a number of indigenous communities occupying this part of the territory. Guyana, I think from a weather climate perspective, Cedric might be better in a better position to compare Guyana with the Caribbean. But I think what is unique about Guyana, though, is that we have two rainfall seasons. The primary rainfall season, which we call in Guyana the May-June rains, but really goes from the end of April just about the beginning of August. And this is the primary rainfall season when we have the most amount of rainfall in the country. At the end of the year, just about November, going into December, early February of the new year, we also have a shorter, smaller rainfall season. We call the secondary rainfall season. So the 2005 floods, for example, were related to the secondary rainfall season. So we are outside of that hurricane belt. So we're not affected by tropical storms. So the main driver of flooding and those sort of hydrometeorological hazards here, it's really the May-June rains. And in between those two rainfall seasons, we have the dry seasons. So we have down south in Guyana, and like you said, Guyana is a big country. Down south, we closer to the Brazilian border, we do not in fact have two rainfall seasons. We have one major rainfall season, which is in fact the May-June rain. And for the other 8 to 9 months of the year, the southern Guyana is generally dry. And Cedric did in fact mention droughts and dry conditions, and the south of Guyana is generally dry for most of the year. So this time of the year, all of Guyana really experiences the rainfall, and that is why we're having this widespread countrywide flooding. With respect to comparing the climates, I think Cedric might be best positioned to speak on that.
Cedric, you're on.
No problem. I don't mind being put on the spot for these matters, because that is my specialty. So no worries, Garvin. So as Garvin has mentioned, you have this duality of the north of Guyana experiencing those two wet seasons, the south experiencing just one wet season. But in both cases, those wet seasons do not align with what we see in the rest of the Caribbean. In the rest of the Caribbean, with the exception of the islands of Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire, and all of the Venezuelan islands, with the exception of those islands, the rest of the Caribbean, including all the way to Belize and the Bahamas, has a main wet season running from somewhere around May or June to October, November. And in the rest of the region, most of the flooding actually occurs between August and November, which is when Guyana has its dry season, its long dry season. So you have a very different seasonality here on average. It is noteworthy to mention, though, for the northern parts of Guyana specifically, Dr. Cummins would have mentioned the secondary wet season from late November to very early parts of February. That season specifically is much more variable. It changes much more between years in terms of how much rainfall falls in that secondary wet season. And as I mentioned before, La Nina contributes to that secondary wet season to be particularly wetter than it usually is. On the contrary, the May-June rains, as they are called indeed in Guyana, they tend to be more regular. As in, you can basically depend upon the fact that every week there's going to be at least several days of rain. That is very different in the secondary wet season. So this year, it was a compounded fact of having that secondary wet season much wetter than usual. Then the short dry season, actually, as Dr. Cummins mentioned, was only dry-ish in the month of February. And then as soon as March and April came, which normally are still part of that shorter dry season, the rains came back already. And so you just kept on piling up more and more rainfall. This is something that is in stark contrast with the rest of the region, because in the rest of the region, February, March, and April, and in Barbados, even the month of May in most years, tend to be the driest part of the year. So whereas in Barbados and many islands in the Caribbean, the nature looks quite dry at this time because we are just entering into the wet season. In Guyana, of course, the situation is completely different. And that indeed is regulated by the seasons that work differently in the Guyanas compared to the island.
But Darren would love to have a little dry season right now. Darren, let's talk about the economic activity. And specifically, I know that part of that area where you are in Region 10, you got bauxite plants there, etc. What's happening?
Well, of course, those plants have been privatized. One of the things that we are concerned about is that we have seen within the past 9 months, many of our people losing their jobs here in Region 10. We have seen just recently the closure of our nursing school. And so persons have, the world is moving away. They're going to more other synthetic means of doing business. So bauxite alone, we're not dependent on that. We're looking at, for example, the agriculture sector. Agriculture holds the greatest potential to create jobs. As it is right now, we would have activated our farmers market day to encourage people to get involved in agriculture. It holds the greatest potential to create jobs. As it is right now, the entire agriculture sector has been hit hard, devastated. We import close to 70% of our food. The other regions that are also affected with the flood that we depend on for the importation of food into the region, we can likely see as a result of the flooding that is occurring in the other parts of Guyana, that we are heading for a terrible situation. Despite all of that, we have seen the administration of the day, and I'm saddened by this, sending home many of our people across the various sectors. This flooded situation that we currently find ourselves in right now will compound the situation that we currently face. Whether it's young people who are recently sent home from the National Data Management Agency, taking close to 100 million out from the region. We have seen the nursing school, as I said, being closed down. Many of the other organizations, Linden Enterprise Network that we depend on for loan, the board has been dissolved and it has not been activated. And so that is why in my opening presentation, I mentioned that cognizant of the fact that government is preparing to go to the parliament for $10 billion, a supplementary budget, it is my hope that in an attempt to address the economic situation right now in the region, that one, we ask that financial grants be made available for every household that have been affected, that businesses who would have lost and their farms would have been hit by the flood, that they receive funding, that the damage that has been done to properties, houses, furniture, electrical appliance, vehicles have been damaged, that these people be compensated. Also, we ask that they be prepared for a fogging exercise to prevent mosquito infection and potential spread of malaria, Zika, dengue fever, that the government invest in what we would have what is recommended to them, these jerry cans, so that persons who don't have access to portable water can use these jerry cans and have access to portable water. We want to also ask for lands for relocation of the people to higher ground, for assistance for them in the rebuilding of their homes. As I said, it's 10 billion we're talking about. I would have submitted a list of infrastructure works, emergency works, capital work for them to consider. And it is my hope that once they act on these projects that we would have submitted, that we can see economic activity picking up, putting people back to work as soon as the water recedes. It's important for me to note that one resident said some years ago, 40 years I think it was, the water wasn't this high. And after the rains things got back to normal at the end of June, it took another 2-3 months for the water to actually recede. Now, if this is the highest in the history of the region and the country, imagine, it means that water may likely recede sometime around November. So clearly, we need a plan in place, and that is why we have been calling for a national disaster task force to be set up. We have not received a positive response as yet from the administration. And so what we did, we went ahead and established the regional disaster task force. I'm happy that we have the churches on board. We have the business community on board. We have folks calling in from the diaspora who want to make contributions. We have set up 7 shelters across the region. We are grateful that the CDC has been on board with us. We've been sharing information, but clearly we need a direct response from the administration as it relates to resources coming to the region for improved infrastructure and ensuring that those communities that have been hard hit, that they receive the support that is needed at this time.
Darren, I have to ask you, I come from a small island, so when I start thinking about how big Region 10 is, can you talk about what will be required, for instance, to transform that area, reduce these incidents of flooding, for instance, or the impact of flooding? Might you have to do a major relocation of people? You talk about higher ground ever in both your comments earlier. I want to get a sense, is that something that's plausible? I mean, do you have to move beyond Linden? Please explain to us.
No, right in Region 10, right in the sub-region 2 areas, lands can be made available for persons to move to higher ground. In fact, it was recommended in the past, but because of the reluctance of some residents, they never wanted to move. But I believe because we have never been so hard hit, reality has now stepped in, and many of them will be prepared to move. What it is that we want to ensure is in the anticipation of such action that the government has the resources readily available. We can identify land. We have land that is available. You just mentioned earlier how big Region 10 is in comparison to some of our Caribbean brothers and sisters, those countries. So there's land that is readily available. And Lands and Survey is a part of the committee. Lands and Survey can expeditiously map out an area within Region 10 that is, of course, higher ground where these persons can be moved to. Of course, we will need for resources to be pumped into Region 10, which is the hardest hit. And it is our hope that the government will see this and we can have a bipartisan approach and bring on board everyone, all the key players. At this time, we do not want to I'm hearing incidents of persons going in and attempting to play politics with the situation, and we reject that in the highest form. This is not a time for that. There are communities that need help, and we call on the administration of the day to put aside any form of politics that they may attempt to play. We have seen images of persons having to show they're being asked questions which political party they voted for. That is just ridiculous at this time. And we have called it out, and we asked for a bipartisan approach. I am willing to work with the administration, with central government, the Regional Democratic Council, the municipality, and the Neighborhood Democratic Council for us to bring the best possible solution at this time to the people all across the region. So yes, if we work together, the Lands and Survey Commission, I believe, can get on board and immediately identify lands at higher ground where families can be moved to.
All right, I'm going to come back and ask you a couple more questions about that area and impact. But let me go back to Darren Cummings, the head of Hydromet. From your own experience, Darren, are we looking at a situation in Guyana such that the Dutch have had in their own experiences? I know the Dutch are part of the Guyana history for a long time, and in fact, at the heart of some of the flood, anti-flooding measures, etc. in the country. But that was a long time ago. What about today?
Well, the situation in, I think, in terms of what happens in the Netherlands and the design of the drainage system in the Netherlands, the coastal Guyana, in terms of the drainage system design, resembles that very much, and that is why we have the concrete dike along the coast and the network of canals that drains the water from inland towards the coast with a series of locks and sluices. So the system as it is right now with sea level rise, it would not be the most effective. I think for that reason, I think Guyana has seen it useful to invest in other forms of infrastructure and assets, including drainage pumps, which are along the coast, so that in the event that we may have these types of realities where there is significant amounts of rainfall, we can actually be in a position to remove the water on a 24/7 basis, which is exactly what the pumps allow us to do. So in terms of the infrastructure, I think from that perspective, there's a change, so that we're not solely dependent on gravity drainage, but now we have in tandem pumps that are working 24/7 to be able to bring relief to the coastal zone of the country. I think the situation inland might be a bit different, where persons live along the banks of the river for convenience, obviously, is access to water, ease of transportation, and everything else that comes with living next to a river. But obviously, it is not the safest place to be living. And if, in fact, moving out of those zones might be difficult, given the economics of the particular area or the country in general, one might have to otherwise look at how we design the infrastructure for those locations so that they can withstand the seasonal type of variability or the annual variability in rainfall and floods as well. So you might very well have two different solutions or sets of solutions for the coastal zone and as well for the hinterland communities. But I think significant investments have been made in terms of improving the drainage coefficient along the coast with the addition of those pumps. And I think a key factor as well is to ensure that the drainage infrastructure is properly and continuously maintained. So this is the engineering side of things. We have to ensure that we have schedules in place in terms of how we maintain our drainage infrastructure to ensure that we are prepared for the rainy season. So I think like the rest of the Caribbean, June 1 signifies the beginning of the hurricane season. We may have to very well start looking at Guyana in a similar way, saying, for example, April 15th, all systems must be in place to ensure that the country is prepared for any eventuality that may come with the primary rainfall season. And similarly, November 1st, at the end of the year, all systems must be in place to deal with any eventuality. So I think how we plan and how we deal with this might very well bring some relief in terms of the impacts as we move forward.
I get a sense here, Cedric, that this is a matter now of a so-called global early warning system or some kind of public campaign that really reinforces the value, not just of preparedness, but clearly understanding what the potential is for the impact of what's happening with the weather.
Yeah, that is correct, Julian. So one of the ways in which we can improve our preparedness is to join plans and policy to deal with eventualities with certain triggers that are provided ahead of time. And that is what we call early warning information. So early warning information can happen at multiple timescales, can be useful at multiple timescales. So ahead of the season, what you can do based on, for instance, if there's a La Nina, you can already predict to a certain extent whether the coming season is expected to be particularly wet compared to other years, or in fact a little bit drier than other years. When exactly the heavy rainfall falls within that season that you forecasted is still a bit difficult to say 3 to 6 months in advance. For that, you look at not the seasonal forecast, so that look at several months, but within the season, while you're in that wet season, you're going to check regularly, and that is the Met Service, for instance, can check regularly what are called sub-seasonal forecasts. In a sub-seasonal forecast, what can be done is, for instance, telling you, not in this week, but perhaps in the next week, or there's maybe 50% chance in the third week from now that you're going to get an extensive rainfall event that might bring widespread flooding. And when that is in place, then you start making sure that all your provisioning, all your pre-positioning is in place, so that and you start to really closely monitor the weather forecast, so that you can jump into action right when the flood is upon us, if it is immediate response, but also that you can already mitigate some of the damage, for instance, if possible, sandbags or relocating parts of the population if they are in a particularly flood-prone area. So then the weather forecasts then tell you exactly in what part of the country, when the rain will come, just how bad the rain will be, and how long it's going to last. And thereby, then hydrologists such as Dr. Cummins can then help guide the country or the region that is most affected in advising, okay, this area is a particularly at risk. Maybe it could be better to have persons relocated to that area. As the chairman of Region 10, Darren, was mentioning, there are areas that are at higher ground. So if you know it in advance, you can actually already relocate some of the persons and perhaps also some of their livelihood options to higher ground, even if it's just temporary. But going forward, decades into the future, we also need to do long-term planning. And that is beyond the timescales of early warning. This is when you start looking at climate change information. And for that, when we talk about flooding, what is important to note for the Caribbean as a whole, and I'm not sure how it is in Guyana particularly, but for the Caribbean as a whole, there's good and bad news. The good news is that there is some indication, although there's still quite some uncertainty about it, but there's some indication that flood-producing rains would become less frequent. However, and this is very important because this is going to make those worst events even worse, when there's a heavy rainfall, there is a potential that rainfall will be even worse, even more rainfall over a short period of time than there was in the past. And believe it or not, that is directly linked to the warming of our global climate. So there is a climate change aspect to that, which is the long-term planning. But for the short term, to prepare ourselves and to respond adequately, then you turn to early warning information.
Darren, I want you to jump in here because he's suggesting he knows the tropical situation for the islands. What are the prospects for Guyana? Is it going to get any worse?
Yes, I believe, if not acted on, we can see things getting out of hand, right? And that is why we need technical people on board, and that the government and other persons here heed the advice that is given to them, so that together we can find a solution. So yes, I believe things can get out of hand.
Darren, I want to ask you one more thing though. And as I watch all that water, all that flooding, etc., I know Guyana is a place with snakes and other wildlife, etc. What can you say on the status there?
Well, I have seen a number of images in other parts of the country. I don't think I saw any here in Region 10, where persons would have sent images of reptiles wrapped around posts and other things. And that is why we're asking persons to, along with the fact that you can create more problems health-wise, we're asking persons not to be, especially our children, playing in the water. And that is why in the setting up of the committee, we ensure that we establish a fully functional flood health preparedness and response plan. We ensure that we had that in place, and the regional health officer would have been advising persons in those communities on waterborne diseases and so on. But we continue to appeal to our people to be mindful that yes, reptiles and other things can come to higher ground, and you have to be on the lookout and to protect yourself, right? And your family, of course.
Then we go to Darren Cummins back at Hydromet. One of the things that I've experienced over the years is the difficulty of people not responding to the information that come from the local authorities, but they rather listen to somebody from, as we say, over in a way. Have you got that problem in Guyana?
Yes, I think this is very true. We've got this challenge in Guyana, like anywhere else, where people, if you're looking at the BBC, for example, a major challenge to weather information in Guyana. But I think the important thing is about how we communicate our message and how we work with the communities. So there have been in the past and even now a number of initiatives that have allowed the Hydrometeorological Service to get involved in what is happening at the community level. And we do this in Guyana from the perspective of agro-meteorology, because as you know, a major part of Guyana's economy is dependent upon agriculture. And weather and climate information obviously is very important for the development and the advancement of that particular sector. So we've got agro-meteorology section that is heavily supported by the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. So our attempt really is to work with communities, to work with farmers, to share weather and climate information. And I think over time, as we've been seeing in the last 2 to 3 years, people are beginning to trust the information that comes out of their hydrometeorological service. But it is a process. It takes time for people to see the value in the information and the services that we are providing. But I think as we continue to work with the communities at the community level, at the farm level, through extension services, etc., I think that relationship and the trust in the information that comes out of the hydrometeorological service improves. I think we also work very closely with the Civil Defense Commission and being able to give information in a timely manner to the Civil Defense Commission, which has a complement of volunteers across the country, that in times like these, that volunteer corps is activated and weather and climate information is actually passed through that corps to the man on the ground. So it is a work in process, it's a challenge, but I think improving our communications mechanism, having a strategy in place, using social media to be able to communicate immediately with the Guyanese public. And I think when people reflect on the information that they were given and look at the situation on the ground and sort of match those two things, I think trust in the Met Service improves. What's also important as well is the National Climate Outlook Forum, something again supported by the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology at the beginning of, or just before the beginning of both of those rainy seasons. We'll call all the stakeholders together, one place, share weather and climate information, but as well as have a review of the past season and the forecasts and how well we did for the last period. And I think that helps us to improve the confidence and the trust in the products and services that comes out of the Met Service.
Let me bring Cedric back in and ask him about the technology. I know that there are a number of tools now that have become available to people like us in terms of tracking the weather conditions and being able to give a little bit more prediction, so to speak. Cedric?
Yes, that is correct, Julian. So I'm not a meteorologist, but I can speak in general of what we're relying on. So on the one hand, we have observation networks. Meteorologists, many people think that meteorologists, their main job is forecasting, and that is true. But the other main task that they have is observing the weather. And you need to observe the weather and build the data that you observe into databases. And those databases can then, over longer periods of time, contribute to making better forecasts. The reason why is that we need to first see what the weather is like, what the climate is like, then try to understand, research it. And if we understand the weather and the climate, we start looking at, okay, are there some parts of the climate and the weather that are predictable? And if so, can we build it into our forecast systems? So you're absolutely right there. And we're not just limited by what we call weather stations on the ground. We can also use satellite-based information, which is available since the second half of the 20th century. And incrementally, those tools are getting stronger and stronger. But you also have things like weather radars, which look at how much rainfall or how intensive the rainfall is over a certain period of time. And if you can track it real time, you can actually see a shower coming your way just an hour in advance, or something really to make a last minute decision. Is it the right time to go out? For instance, do I want to take my car and drive down that road, noting that I know that sometimes that road can flood? So if I see on the radar that, for instance, there's a heavy shower coming, I might want to either go right now to make sure I avoid that shower, or delay until after the shower and the rainfall has receded. But I just wanted to add one point to the very critical argument that Dr. Cummins made about engaging with your users and communicating forecasts, etc. It's really important that as a region, we learn to communicate between the weather forecasters and the users of the information. That's the same for climate. And the reason why is that you know that scientists have sometimes very complicated words and words that I might interpret differently than yourself. And so it's critical that you engage together in a discussion. Oh, that's what you mean when you say this. So for instance, saying fair to fine with a chance of scattered showers, to me as a climatologist doesn't mean absolutely anything. However, I know I've learned over time in talking with weather forecasters that it means for now you need not worry about flooding. And that is valuable information. Yes, it might not tell you exactly, is it going to rain in the next hour or not? But it does tell you, okay, today is maybe not the day that I have to worry about flooding. And that's very important because that is what is going to further build the trust that the persons have in the meteorological services. And that leads me to the last point I want to make here very briefly, is that more and more weather services are geared towards not telling you what the weather is, but how it will impact you. In other words, what it will do to you. If I am a farmer, I need to know when to plant. And needing to know that, I want to know when that wet season comes. And is it going to be delayed this year or is it not going to be delayed this year? That's one thing. But if I'm a disaster risk manager, I need to know, okay, is that flood going to be expansive? Is it going to cover the entire region 10 or the whole of Guyana? And so for such things, it's really important that we move away from saying there's a high chance of showers to saying, okay, we might actually expect that level of intense rainfall and we're this sure about it. So that means that there's now a certain alert level, orange, for instance, for flooding in a certain area, because that is when you start talking the kind of language that enables decision-making for one and all. And so that's the biggest move that we have been going through in the past 5 years or so throughout the Caribbean. And incrementally, what you will see is that Met services around the Caribbean are more and more going to tell you not just what the weather is, but very importantly, what it will do, how it will impact you. Because that is how you really build the trust of persons.
Darren, I know you trust the weather people in Guyana, no doubt about that. But let me give you just 1 minute. A last word comes from you to your audience, not just in Guyana, but beyond.
So,
Darren?
Is that Darren or is it?
That is Darren, yes.
So I just want to appeal to persons around the world to, of course, come on board, assist Guyana and Region 10. Pray for us at this time. I want to say to the government of Guyana that this is a humanitarian issue, a humanitarian crisis. This flood hasn't shown a discriminatory position of who to affect, and therefore no one should take such a position. Every region needs help. In fact, Region 10, as we zoom into Kokwani and Rockstone and Malali, are the most hard-hit areas. We are dealing with this disaster simultaneously while we have the challenge of persons, the low vaccination rate right now in the region for COVID-19. And so we call on the administration to expeditiously approve an increased allocation to assist those families that are affected, pump resources into the communities in Region 10, and so that we can somewhat get back to a state of normalcy, even as we go forward. But in closing, please pray for Region 10 and Guyana.
Thank you very much, Darren, as opposed to Darren. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us and giving us a better sense of the flooding crisis in Guyana. I'm Julian Rogers on Caribbean Bridges from Kingston, Jamaica.